All right, my name is Paul Doherty. I work for the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation, and I'm welcoming you to our first PrepTech talk of the series for this year, and it's called Geo-enable Search and Rescue in Disasters. The objectives for today, the learning objectives are, number one, to learn who to contact in order to gain access to existing field apps hosted by FEMA and the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Our second key objective is to understand how to use basic field data collection tools, in this case, Survey 123, configured with the SAR and First Responder Survey template. We want to understand how to quickly analyze and report against live field data for situational awareness. And really important is to help you begin to develop your own geospatial game plan and access additional resources. So this is a quick training to give you some awareness, but the goal is to give you some homework and resources that you can use on your own. So you might be asking, why use geospatial tools for search and rescue, in particular urban search and rescue during disaster? And here's a couple of key reasons that we're hearing. Number one is real-time situational awareness and collaboration. For example, I can see where other SAR teams have already searched and what's needed in the field. Enhanced data collection and reporting capabilities. So I can see where teams are or have been and what they've observed. I can also share data with other agencies and partners. And I can see what areas have been covered and what remains to be searched. This really helps with improved search strategy and tactics. And finally, one that we find really important is just having geospatial coordination. I can reach out to organizations and groups like the SAR Geospatial Working Group to find access to the layers I need, because we know that not one single organization has all the answers on their own. Today's agenda, we just kicking off here with a quick introduction. We'd like to cover what's in the SAR and First Responder Toolkit. It's a website you'll have access to. We want to do a little bit of hands-on work, although you'll have plenty of time to do training after this. We want to introduce a few key stakeholders here: Lance Gilmore from the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Program, Jeff Doolin from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and we'll talk a little bit with Jared Doak and his experiences using some of these tools during the Shake and Fury exercise. At the end, we'll wrap up with what's kind of the high-level plan for the 2019 hurricane season, and a little bit about the R&D we're doing and what's next. So first, let's just talk quickly about who we are. The National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit. And our vision is to build a nation of emergency responders and leaders equipped with the knowledge and skills in applying technology and data to change the outcome for survivors. That's a pretty important goal. I think most of you are here because you follow that this is an important thing, and so do our partner organizations that we work with. Our reach is primarily national. We have a 20,000 plus member network. What you're seeing on the screen here is just a dashboard of some of the participants we were able to map today from your zip codes. You can see here it's a mix of local government, federal government, state, some private sector, NGOs, academia, and territorial governments, et cetera. And it's not all GIS professionals. There's actually more first responders in this group today than there are GIS professionals. And I did want to put a quick plug in that we have 2 New Zealand participants and 1 Australian. Not that we're trying to create any competition there, but they've been really helpful as they've pioneered a lot of these workflows, and we're learning a lot from them. So we're happy they could make it here today. So again, what is this all about? It's about providing the right actionable information at the right time, something that the NAPSG Foundation works and strives towards. How we do it is through primarily through national guidelines and standards by promoting best practices. We also believe in community. We foster regional collaboration through events, exercises, and simulation. We want to help you build your own capacity in using innovative technology. And when the time comes, we can also help with knowledge transfer and technical assistance, and that's sort of at the tip of the spear, but it's all built on best practices and community. We do have a resource library. If you just go to napsgfoundation.org, we have many free resources, including the deliverables, the presentation, and the video from this recording today. So let's talk about why you're all here. You're hoping to learn about the SAR and First Responders Geospatial Toolkit. It is actually a story map website. You may have seen a story map before, but it's a configurable website that we're keeping up to date. And we've listed resources by their capability. We've provided links to training videos, and this is where we'll maintain the key points of contact if and when the next hurricane occurs. This is where we will we'll put everything we know about who you need to get in touch with at this location. The sandbox, the tools that you can get hands-on with are not to be used for real-world response. You would contact one of the organizations listed there or your own administrator to use them. But this is a great place to test some things out without needing to log in. So this website is publicly available, and I will show you what it looks like. Just a quick check if one of our panelists can tell me, can you still see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. All right, so when you land, there's a quick introduction that tells a little bit about our story. Before the 2018 hurricane season, we pulled together a field data working group consisting of state and local search and rescue teams. And what we did is we decided to produce a standard template that would both mimic what the FEMA USAR teams were using, but also be available to state and local teams so that we could have a common location language. So the first resource capability listed here is common location language. And what does that mean? Well, number one, for search and rescue, you need to adopt the US National Grid if you're going to be working on disasters. The reason is this is the location language of search and rescue, and there are many tips and tools available to you to adopt that language. For those of you that work outside of the federal system, US National Grid is the same or equivalent to military grid reference system, and is very easy to transition to from using things like UTM. The next step is to adopt at least the standard symbology that FEMA has established for urban search and rescue. It's available here on this website you see in the center, and there's a data dictionary here if you want to get familiar with some of the terms. And then finally, you want to adopt a standard schema. The best way to do that is to attend this virtual training today and learn a little bit about how you can get access to some ready-to-go tools that actually the FEMA ground teams will be using this year. There are more resources listed here. I think the most important one is to go to the responsesystem.org and poke around the Urban Search and Rescue System website. There's also some free tools here for identifying just your location in US National Grid, Find USAR, and an app called My USNG. These are really easy to use tools and a great way to get hands-on with US National Grid. The next capability is just having general readiness, and that involves using things like live maps. Here I've just embedded a web map that's currently focused on flooding in the Midwest. You can click on these little stream gauges and get an idea of the water's going up or down. During hurricane season, this might be the hurricane swath. And this is geospatial data that's accessible by everyone. You can go to this website here for a sample, but you want to kind of walk through these steps with your team to see if you have more specific needs. One of the often overlooked capabilities in search and rescue is the ability to create assignments so that you can actually have a plan on where to go. I think I made an assignment for Jared in Kansas City last night. You can take a look at what that looks like. Again, FEMA makes their wide area search terminology available to you, so you can see the different types of search types here. And all we've done here is produced a template for you GIS professionals. That means it's a feature layer, and we put it inside of an app here so you can just see how to quickly make assignments. So you don't need to be a GIS professional to make these, although you might want to work with a GIS professional to pre-plan assignments so that you're not doing it during a disaster. Another important capability, and this is one that has many, many options, is the ability to navigate. And I think back to Hurricane Katrina, where they were, going into gas stations and grabbing atlases. Still today, we're using paper maps quite often in the field, but there's also apps that you can use on your phone, both online and offline. I just put one example here that you can use right now called Explorer for ArcGIS. You can use it with or without a login. And you can actually find the Sandbox web map and test this out on your phone yourself. I put links to more resources here. I'm sure there's even more options. Someone just mentioned to me today, maps.me. But the idea is the closer your navigation can be tied to your data collection, the better. And so I put some of those options here for you. But today, what we really wanted to focus on is field data. Field data capture in the past has traditionally been done with a Garmin GPS. I don't think that that will go away this hurricane season, but it's a solid framework, and the one that FEMA uses is called Iron Sights. So what we've done here is, as SAR teams want to move to apps so that they have live data, we've mimicked the Iron Sights workflow in a Survey123 template. Survey123 is a mobile application that you can download. You can download it for free, and I hope that some of you did it today before the exercise. And once you've downloaded the Survey123 app, your administrator, or in this case, NAPSG, can create forms and deploy them for you. So you can use them on your phone and collect data in real time if you're online, or in, I would say, punctuated real time if you're offline. In other words, when you get back to the command post, you can push the data to the database. There's a full training playlist here that you can go through, but what I'd like everyone to do now is to begin to load this app. If you don't have the app already, then you'll need to install it, and you may not have time to do that today. But if you have the application, all you need to do is open up your camera, point it at the code, and you should be able to click on a link that opens Survey123 inside the application. This survey works best through the mobile app. There are some phones that require that you hold down the home button at the same time. I think some Androids while scanning with the camera, but for the most part, this QR code should work. And I'm just gonna check here on the chat. Is anybody able to scan that and open it? Looks like Brian wins the door prize. I'm gonna go ahead, and this is always dangerous, and attempt to share my phone screen, and we can kind of walk through this together. So just a moment. All right, so I'm mirroring my phone. I've tried to turn off notifications. Hopefully my wife doesn't send me any requests. But okay, so if you're all seeing my screen, I'm gonna mimic the workflow here on my side. I'm just opening up my camera. I get a little link to open in Safari because I'm using an iPhone. And in this case, it's gonna prompt me just to open it in the app. This is something you'll wanna do before you leave and go into the field if at all possible. So this is just gonna be a brief introduction. Once the survey is open, you can sort of read through the instructions here that just talk a little bit about how to save time entering data. We also put a trick in here, which I hope works for you, where if someone forgot to scan the survey, they can do it right here from your phone. Here is where we can enter in event details. And in this case, I'm just gonna paste in ones that I've already used, and that's what you should be doing to save time. And this is just a way to sort of identify yourself. Keep in mind that some organizations like FEMA, since they already know their pre-designated team names, that could be a drop-down list, but for many others, you'll have to manually enter. And it's a good idea to have a naming convention for your teams so that you can, we can group you all together in things like dashboards. We're gonna go down to my favorite part, location. By default, the survey is gonna default to where your device thinks it is using a combination of cell, satellite GPS, because every phone has a cell GPS, has a GPS that connects to satellites. Or in many cases, your phone's gonna do the best it can to use a combination of both. You can see right now, my phone's trying to use my Wi-Fi, so 65 meters isn't really great. If I'm outside, it's probably gonna switch to either GPS or cell, and that will improve my accuracy. However, I'm gonna tap on the map. So if you just tap on the map, this is gonna provide more options for me. And if I zoom in, because I have imagery as my base map, I can actually say, I'm actually reporting against this structure. and move the pin to what I'm looking at versus where I'm standing. And there's a lot of use cases where this is important. Some other options here are to, if you need more context, you can click on the upper right. There's a hamburger button. We call it a hamburger button because it looks like a hamburger. And this is where you can load in other types of base maps. So for instance, in some areas, OpenStreetMap is great, especially if you're working outside the US. In other places, I might just use a world topography base map. In a lot of places in the US, this will include building footprints. It might be easier to read, or I'll just switch back to my imagery. Another option here is I can click on the little satellite icon, and this will read out my coordinates, not just in US National Grid, but also in latitude and longitude. So why is this important? As most of you know, if you're working with a helicopter or other airship, they may want you to report your position in this specific format. So I do suggest you practice reading location in both languages. By default, though, your data is going to be recorded in US National Grid. There are a few other options inside this map. We can type in addresses or specific coordinates. If you work with your administrator, they can load maps that'll work in here offline. But if you are offline and you haven't taken this step, your map will be blank and you'll be back to just using a GPS. Lots more to talk about on that topic. Okay, so if we go back to the form by clicking the little arrow, you can see my USNG coordinates there. I've defaulted to have my waypoints say structure no damage, but here's where we're actually going to fill out the form. The waypoints, as I mentioned, will match the USAR, FEMA USAR ones, plus some ones that the SAR working group voted for. Today, let's just all, if you haven't already, just use location update. This is just a quick way to let others know where I am or where I was. I can put some comments in here. Since I'm doing some testing, I like to indicate how I'm doing the testing. And after this exercise, you'll want to go and explore. This is a smart form. So if you enter information that has to do with human interactions, you'll be prompted for more info, like number of people. If you are mapping a structure, it might ask you what type of structure. And this is important because it can help with things like damage assessment. All of the extra questions are optional and are something you'll want to discuss with the agency having jurisdiction and your team and mission objectives to decide on what level of detail you want to go to. In all cases, I suggest you have a plan for reducing or eliminating any personally identifiable information. If you put information about victims and survivors in there, it'll really limit the use of this data, and you might actually be violating some data storage policies. Finally, we added this year on request from FEMA to add a waypoint top option for community lifelines. All this means is that if you're out in the field and you're mapping something like a damaged bridge, you might tag it with the transportation lifeline. If it was a hospital, you might tag it with health and medical. And what this is meant to do is provide some level of reconnaissance so that if you are seeing damage in the field and it's part of your mission objectives, you can report back so others can take action on it. There's a lot more detail we can go into on the forum. I did make a training playlist that you can follow up with, but let's move on to photos. In this survey, we've allowed for you to add up to 3 photos, and we don't recommend that you add photos to every point, but there are use cases where it makes sense to add a photo. You'll want to discuss with your team if you want to do landscape or portrait. I'm a bigger fan of landscape because you fill out more of the image and it looks better on screen. And there's actually information being stored about your photo, like the location and the angle you were facing, but we can cover that later. So if you've done all that, and if I wasn't talking, you probably could do that in about 20 seconds, and you're happy with your input, you'll just go ahead and click the green check mark on the bottom right. You're presented with 3 options: send later, send now, or continue. Continue will take you back. Send later is a good option if you think you don't have a reliable internet connection, or if you think that you'd like to review your data before you send it. But in any cases where it's possible, I suggest just sending now. You can always review the data later and make edits. We'll talk more in other training videos about things like your outbox. If you're working offline and you collect 100 points, when you get back online, you have to remember to send your points. Okay, so let's go ahead and just send this now. And with any luck, my live demo will have worked. And we're just going to go back to our next step, which is the dashboard. So I think I had about 60 in there before. So we're up to 102, means we've added about 40. And a dashboard is just one way to visualize the data. So for example, I've configured here so I can go ahead and look at the last survey that came in. This dashboard is basically built on top of a web map that has the data, and the data is both a database, but it's also a layer. This dashboard can be configured by your tech info specialist once they've had training. I'm sure that FEMA will have a strategic dashboard for all teams to use, but you may want to produce a more tactical dashboard that answers your specific questions. NAPSG actually has a resource for how best to configure a resource management dashboard. So if you're a GIS or a tech info specialist, you think you'll be configuring these things, please see that resource. Another thing on the dashboard is it's live, right? So it's counting the number of waypoints, which gives me a pretty good metric of what's going on. I can also, we're doing some testing with various tracking software, so I can see some of the latest tracks, although this could be coming from a GPS and being manually updated. And I can also see things like before we talked about assignments. So if we're creating assignments and tracking the status, a dashboard can be configured to track that as well. There are lots more options here. There are many different filters that could be created, filtering by date and team name and event, but that's really up to you and your team and your organization to design. This is sort of a basic configuration where I get a quick tally of my top 10 waypoints, maybe see the number of people that have been recorded into the system. And if I need to, because there's just a lot of information on the map, I can filter by 4 broad categories, such as where are the hazards, human interactions, what are the structures that have been mapped and assessed, or in this case, you know, we're just looking for some of the support icons. All right, I'm gonna keep going, and Jared or other panelists, if there's questions or issues, you can try to help them, but remember that this website will be available for you to use after the training's over. The dashboard is one way to visualize the data. Another way to visualize the data is through the Survey 123 report. And this is something that has to be shared with you. It's ideal for a tech info specialist to have access to this, because this is where we can really structure our analysis and reporting. So if we look here in the analysis tab, the Survey 123 platform is going to automatically begin to generate some products. So I can see here many of you and data that's been entered are in these grid zone designations. Probably one of the most important information products for SAR is the tally of waypoints. So I can see here the number of location updates and structures, et cetera. And pretty much every field that's in there will be summarized here. So it's a little bit different than a dashboard. It's more data centric, but for some of you, this is really important. You can see here the structure types that have been mapped for damage. This is really important for damage assessment, as Jared will talk a little bit about in a bit. And I can even come down and quickly just see a gallery. Some of you have nice dogs. I'll try not to click on too many of these in case you didn't expect us to show them. But you can see here more information about the photo. I can see Jeff Maunder here is in Tauranga in New Zealand, and I can see a little bit of information about his photo. So that's really, really useful. So a lot of people overlook this. Even GIS people forget that this is here, but this analysis platform is really powerful. The other things you can do here is set up filters. So if you wanted to filter specifically by your team, or if you wanted to filter by a specific waypoint category, if you've ever used any software that has filters in it, this is a pretty easy tool to use. You can also filter by, you know, through a data screen. So this may be a little more comfortable for some of you if you're used to seeing spreadsheets. You can see all the points on a map just generically, and we can actually begin to filter here, open in another map. Or something that Jared will talk a little bit about, we can actually export the data even into formats like KML, but primarily you'll want to work with a GIS professional to integrate the live data versus download the data. So I hope that makes sense. This comes up a lot in disasters. A county just wants to filter by their county's points. We can do a little bit of analysis and tag each of these points with the county, and then they can download what they need just for their particular jurisdiction. We're going to talk a little bit about tracking and deployment options, but this is the end of our hands-on session. So let's just take a quick look. It looks like we got up to 165 waypoints. That's pretty impressive. And let's just see the last one here. Cool. So who's that? Where are we? Oh, we're in my home state in New York. Great. Well, nice work, everyone. I know that not everybody's used to using mobile apps. A lot of people are using apps like this for their day-to-day operations, especially in fire. And I think that's really important because the more you get comfortable using the apps and the information products they produce, the better you'll be able to respond during disaster. So a common use case would be something like building inspections or fire alarm inspections and using Survey123 and a dashboard to track progress on that. Okay, so that's the end of the hands-on. Let me just do a quick time check here. Jared, if you've got comms, how are we doing on time?
We are right on time.
We are right on time, okay. If anybody knows Lance and Jeff, we'll probably be behind after our next session. That was a joke, but what I'd like to do now is, that was a chance for everybody to test the sandbox. You all have access to it. Again, it's just meant for training. But what does it mean? What does this all mean if you're actually a member of a team and you're wanting to get started? And so I wanted to start with one really important group, which is FEMA Urban Search and Rescue. And I'll just do a quick comms check. Lance, can you hear us?
I'm here, if you can hear me.
Great. Well, Lance, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and I will ask you a few pointed questions for our audience.
All right. Hello, all. My name's Lance Gilmore. I'm with the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue branch. I've pretty much been the GIS liaison to our task forces and FEMA GIS and historically NGA for the past almost 13 years now. I'm not a GIS specialist, but I'm well supported by SMEs and other folks. You may or may not know, we have 28 task forces throughout the United States. There's approximately 5,000 to 6,000 members within our system, mostly comprised of first responders. Historically, when we're doing search data collection, we've used the GPS. That's been the common piece of equipment in all our task forces' equipment caches. Recently, in collaboration with NAPSG, we have made Survey123 available to our system. The way we communicate with our systems is we issue general memos and program directives. So the general memo, it made it available to the system. It's not mandating that they use Survey123. And this year, we're probably going to have a blended approach while task forces are capable or working on purchasing the equipment that'll support all of us eventually going to Survey123 and hopefully other tools that can improve our response.
Great. And Lance, I just had a few general questions, about FEMA Urban Search and Rescue, because I find a lot of teams, if they're not a member or they're not in a metropolitan area, they may not actually know that much about it. But, real quick, how and when does, a FEMA USAR team get mobilized?
So like I said, their day jobs are mostly first responders. And then our branch at FEMA is responsible for activating them. We can activate them to pre-position them in anticipation of a state or a local requesting assistance later, or otherwise at the request of the state or locals, we also deploy them. When we deploy them, whether you're getting one task force or 28 task forces, you're also going to get an incident support team, which is basically the command and control element of our task forces.
Great. And about how many teams are there?
There's 28 throughout the United States.
Oh, great. And I guess some of the teams would be responding, or most of the teams would be, they can respond as a FEMA Urban Search and Rescue team, but other times they might be configured as a state or a mutual aid resource. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So if the disaster is, say, in the state of Florida, our We have 2 task forces in Florida that are part of our national system. As of now, they remain state assets.
Right, that makes sense. All right, well, I think for a lot of people's questions, if you are a FEMA team, I guess number 1 is read the memo, right? And number 2 is, stay in touch with Lance and look for comms on how to get access to, the form, both before disaster for training, but also when they do mobilize for an event. Cool. And I think, Lance, I've really enjoyed working with you. I think one of the things I look forward to the most is discussing, professional development with the urban search and rescue teams. There are many GIS professionals that sort of moonlight on a task force, but aren't recognized in that capacity. I think what we've seen in wildland fire is it's really, no matter what technology is being used, it's good to have geospatial focused people as part of your team. So something I don't plan on letting up on. So let your boss know.
I agree. And, through working with you, we're all part of the ESF9 family. We're supposed to be collaborating, but you also help us with the outreach to the states and locals, the folks that we're going to eventually assist in the time of need.
All right, great. Well, any other thoughts, Lance?
I'm good. You know where to find me. I pick up the phone and try to answer emails as quick as possible. So feel free to contact me and we can discuss further if needed.
Great, great. And I'm really excited this year. Lance is going to have a dedicated partner in crime, Adam, who's a GIS specialist for FEMA that is also supporting this. And FEMA is quickly training up their GIS staff on this process so they can build depth to the team. So it's good news for everyone. All right. Thanks a lot, Lance. We would clap if everybody could hear you. How about Jeff Doolin? Do we have comms?
Yes, we do. Good afternoon, everyone.
How are you, Jeff?
I'm great, great. So welcome, everybody. And I'm Jeff Doolin with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Retired from the Charlotte Fire Department after 34 years. I was the deputy chief over special operations and emergency management there. And so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart in looking at the response to disasters, but also looking at the response to day-to-day operations and the use of GIS and how we implement it into our operations so that when we have the big event, it's not something new, that we really kind of use what we do every day. We just use it on a bigger scale.
Very good. Well, I've got a couple of questions for you, Jeff. So you talked a little bit about your experience and who is the IAFC. What's the relationship between, IAFC and, state urban search and rescue or state and local rescue?
Yeah, so the USAR group, we work real close with them. The IAFC has a urban search and rescue committee that is made up of both state and local teams, as well as members from the federal response system that Lance represents. And what we try and do is look at how we coordinate between those 2 levels of government to support response in a natural or man-made disaster to get the most bang for the buck out of those resources that are on the ground. We really want to look too about what are the needs upcoming as far as technology to support better resource management.
Great. And, we talked a little bit about support in the past, but, what happened in 2018 with the IAFC and using a previous, I guess, the original version of this survey?
Yeah, so we kind of started in 2017 with Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, developing the Survey 123 to put out to some teams to use to kind of do a beta test of, is this possible? Does it work? And how is it accepted by the search and rescue community? And we learned in 2017 it was very useful, provided a lot of great information to decision makers in real time so that they could look at what was happening in the field and help make strategic as well as tactical decisions off of that. Then in 2018, over the course of the winter and the spring, we really redeveloped the survey into a more useful tool based on the information that we got from the 2017 season. And then we took that and deployed that for Hurricanes Florence and Michael. And it was very, very well received by everybody. And literally word of mouth started spreading and people were calling saying, hey, I want to participate in this and I want to be able to collect data. And then also working with Lance and his group, we were able to combine the FEMA team data along with our data into one common operating picture that gave us a full scope for the first time of what was really happening on the ground in those disaster areas, where searches have been conducted, what was found there, and then also using that data on the backside for analytics. One of our greatest accomplishments during the 2018 response to Florence was that the Northwest Pacific Labs was literally using data collected from our surveys to help validate their FEMA flood modeling. And so they would take that every night and compare data and the metadata within the pictures and the reports, and then look at how their predictions had forecasted against that. So when you start thinking about it, the data that we were collecting during that event was helping to make the model better for the next day and down the line.
And throughout all this, I think the key message was we got together as a group before the hurricane. We're able to test these things out. One of the key things we learned from 2018 was don't deviate from what FEMA has been doing too much, right? Because then we're not interoperable. So the standard template we've put together by default, and Jared will talk about this, is backwards compatible with even FEMA GPS workflows called iron sites. And that became really important because I was heavily involved in trying to bring the data together. And if the schemas don't match, for those of you who know what a schema is, you run into a lot of trouble. So why don't we just talk quickly about your proposed plan and how IAFC can support this year. I think we talked about at least two scenarios. The first one being if you don't know what ArcGIS Online is, this is the first time you're hearing about it, or your GIS staff don't have the usernames or licenses to support you, you can work with the IFC to purchase those. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, and it's not really purchases. We help support you in using the usernames. One of the things that the IFC has done is establish this enterprise platform to be able to use for these types of disasters, as well as to use for exercises and training events that take place every day across the country. And so what the IFC has done is if you're interested from your local jurisdiction, or we're working with a couple states right now, we can provide you with usernames, and then you can be using those right now in exercises or training, so that when you are deployed on the real event, it's not the first time that your team members are using the tool. They're well familiar with it, how to use it, all the little nuances about actually using it in the field. You've already overcome all that learning. And so if you're interested in participating in that or finding out more information, please reach out to me, and my email will pop up there somewhere on one of the slides where you can contact me directly, and we can talk about how to get your team involved in what we're doing.
Great. And then a second scenario, and this is fairly common. I think a lot of, especially the search and rescue community, they had no idea that they already have access to ArcGIS Online through, perhaps the county law enforcement or county public works department. And it's a matter of getting to know your GIS professionals, because they may not even know that you want access to it, or they may not even know that GIS or really geospatial tools can be used for SAR. So that second scenario, I can speak to a little bit. A lot of, especially county agencies, already have ArcGIS Online. And I don't want to pretend we're the first ones to use ArcGIS Online this way. Some of you SAR teams may already have your own forms or your own approach and have ArcGIS Online. But for large disasters, I think it's a great idea to team up with the IFC on this, so that all the data goes into one viewing platform. And in all cases, one thing that the GIS staff, especially if they're new to ArcGIS Online, get concerned about is, how do I get access to the data? Jared's going to talk a little bit about interoperability, but this is not a siloed system. It's an interoperable system. And that's really important because search and rescue and first responders are the first ones out there, and their observations can help really the rest of emergency management and recovery. So something to be thinking about. And Jeff, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but are there any states that you're working with going into 2019? I know we didn't catch up this week, but anything you can speak to there?
Yeah, we're actually working with state of South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee right now on this project to go ahead and get them, and then also Florida. I just talked to them yesterday. So again, those hurricane states that we worked with last year really saw the value in the tool, and they want to be sure and provide that this year going into this season. And one of the things too, just kind of backing up to what you just said, the value of what you do every day is value to you and your community. But when you are either deployed to another jurisdiction or you receive resources from another jurisdiction into your community, we want to make sure that all that data is mashing up correctly so that we can paint that one picture about what's going on and where everybody is. And again, that resource management is very important. And I think that from Lance's perspective, as well as our perspective, seeing that last year really occur for the first time about, I don't need to go down that road because, well, I know a team's already been down that road and done that search. I'm more focused on this road over here where nobody's been. That's truly what we want to get to, is this one world picture where all the SAR teams, no matter state, local, international, federal, whoever, are all communicating on one platform.
Very good. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate your time. I can almost guarantee if you're a state that isn't aware of this, either you don't have a plan yourself or you're not planning to, be a part of this working group, I can guarantee you'll get hit by a Category 4 hurricane this year. So that was a joke, but just basically, understand that there are people trying to plan a good strategy on your behalf to help you. Please do reach out to Jeff if you don't think you fit in the FEMA USAR bucket, or even if you're a FEMA team that also gets deployed locally. This is something to consider. And it's based on sort of best practices from last year. So, all right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So I am, Jared is the timekeeper and he's also speaking next. I think he has 1 minute, but I think we can give you a little bit of time here, Jared, to talk a little bit about your experiences in the field, not just as the person who's been curating this template, but also from your Missouri Task Force 1 perspective, coming out of Shaken Fury and some tornado deployments. So, Jared, how's your comms?
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about deploying the kit yourself. Again, if at all possible, we recommend that you utilize one of the forms that are already stood up by either FEMA or the IAFC. But there are a few instances where deploying the kit yourself may be beneficial. For example, deploying the kit would be a good training opportunity for GIS staff and would give your organization a place to practice with using the tools and suggested workflows. And it's also good for small local incidents where there isn't a state or federal participation. And finally, the kit's available for those who are required to use alternative platforms for data collection, but you still want to stay consistent with the data model and collaborate with other partners. So it's available for you to use that as well. And if you do deploy the kit yourself, we recommend coordinating with the SAR Geospatial Working Group, because you want to make sure that you're still using the latest version of the survey. After every season and after Shaken Fury, we've made updates and fixes to the survey. So you always want to make sure you have the latest one. And it also helps you stay communicating with the working group so that you can share your data and collaborate with neighboring agencies. And again, we want to stress that deploying the survey yourself is not ideal for a large-scale incident where FEMA and IFC partnering agencies are deploying. As you've experienced, the survey runs on a smart device, so there are several things to consider when sending teams into the field to collect data, or if you're going to be purchasing devices for your team or agency. First, know that Survey 123 and pretty much all the Esri apps work across operating systems, so it doesn't really matter if it's an Android or iOS device. That's kind of personal preference. And you also want to consider the size of the device. Some people prefer the tablet for a larger screen, and tablets do work well in a command post or if you're in a vehicle. But if you're moving a lot, some people prefer the smaller form factor of a mobile phone because you can operate it one-handed and you can also slip it in your pocket while not in use. And while you're in the field, you need to think about ways to conserve the battery on your device. You can do this by turning off unused apps and, depending on the environment, managing the screen brightness. With Missouri Task Force 1, we have a portable battery packs that we send out with each of the teams to keep the batteries topped off. You also want to consider ways to ruggedize your device. You'll be working in wet and harsh environments, so you want to protect them. And so make sure you look into purchasing protective cases for each device that you get. And I had mentioned screen brightness before, but it can become an issue when you're in the field. You'll want a device with a pretty bright screen so that you can see it in direct sunlight. And finally, the one most people always talk about is connectivity. Most Wi-Fi only devices don't have a built-in GPS, so make sure you get a cellular enabled device. And even if you don't activate the plan on that, you'll need a cellular enabled device. And the apps can work offline, but if you want the map, you'll have to take some steps to preload those maps on your device before you lose a connection. And as Paul showed before, when you're done collecting, you have to be sure that you send that data from your outbox. And if you're working in an area of sketchy reception, you might want to put your phone in airplane mode, because that'll get you the most accurate location.
Yeah, another reason for airplane mode is, you know, when you got that one bar, your phone's working really hard to get it, and you may not be getting anything out of it anyway. So in a lot of places with limited comms, just, you know, while you're working, put it on airplane mode and maybe check back later.
Yeah. And then interoperability. So Survey123 works with other ArcGIS field apps and web mapping applications. So you can create a web map using the data you're collecting in Survey123 and see it directly in either Collector or Explorer. And if you're unfamiliar, Collector is a map-based app that allows for editing and easy offline deployment. And you can download pre-designated areas for offline use on the fly. But it does take a little bit of training to take full advantage of its capabilities. Explorer is another map-based app that you can use for simple viewing, and it's easy to get up and running with, but taking it offline is a bit more difficult. In the past few weeks, we've been testing QuickCapture for ArcGIS, and it actually was released today, so you can get online and read more about that, and you should be able to download the app sometime today and test it out. And we also tested out Tracker during Shake and Fury, and it's for recording tracks, and it's a premium app, and it produces a lot of data, but it does have potential. And the survey can also be used as a starting point for preliminary damage assessments. And when the PDA team goes out in an area to conduct their assessments, they can utilize the data collected by USAR as a starting point, so they don't have to start from scratch. And it's important because it saves valuable time and exposure to risk, saves money, and it can ultimately help the public understand the situation and recover quickly. Paul mentioned we added a question about community lifelines. You can integrate the REST services into other platforms, and it's also compatible with iron sites. So there's fields in the form that you can directly append data directly into the survey from a GPX once it's been processed. And it's labor intensive, but it is possible. And you can go to the next slide. And also you can export the data out of it in multiple formats, including KML. So if you're really comfortable in Google Earth, you can export that out and look at it. Just know that once you do an export, it's no longer live and dynamic. So you'll have to keep an export schedule up so that you always have the latest version. Right. Paul, you want to do this?
Yeah, we've been talking for a while, and we're about to get into our closing thoughts about the game plan for this year. But if you all are tired of listening to us and you want to participate in a quick poll, you can go to www.menti.com, and Jared, maybe you can type it into the chat, and you can use the code 104233. And we'll take a look at this in a bit, but what this is a live poll, so that we can kind of see what you think based off of what you've seen today and your experience before. You know, what are your priority training needs? So again, that's menti.com. And it looks like my code changed. It's actually 3871. And Jared, if you can test that out, I don't know why the code changed, but.
Yep, the new code works.
Okay, that's 3870 and the number 1. All right, so we're starting to get some votes. And this will just help NAPSG and FEMA and IAFC and others begin to understand a little bit about how you'd prioritize. So the idea here is not that we're going to charge you $100, but if you had $100 or you had time, how would you like to see it spent? And I made it specifically so you can't just spread the money evenly. So you have to actually put some thought into this. We'll come back to this in a bit. It looks like early results are trending. I don't want to skew this too much, but towards more information about field data collection and analysis. But we'll try to come back to this in a bit. So Jared, any other closing thoughts?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for your time and sharing your observations from the field. All right, so I wanted to quickly speak to the game plan, or what we know for 2019 and what's next. In 2018, a group of GIS professionals and situation section chiefs and others got together, and we put together a joint SAR activity map. And today we mostly talked about ground SAR and swiftwater SAR, people who are actually going door to door. But there are a lot of other different types of search and rescue. And so we tried to pull together a joint SAR activity map with all of the spatial data we were aware of. And so in this screenshot, you're just seeing the state and FEMA teams and just getting an understanding of their coverage. But we understand that, you know, partners like the US Coast Guard play a major role in rescue. Or as you saw, especially in Hurricane Harvey, that actually volunteers are out helping each other out, and they're able to map themselves as well. And so we are trying to work with NGOs and others that are coordinating those efforts to just to have the best situational awareness or common operating picture we can. This was done in almost, I would say, a volunteer effort. It wasn't planned. It was done based out of need and because we could. In 2019, we tested this again during the national exercise, Shaken Fury. And this time, we worked with another ESF 9, Emergency Support Function number 9, which is Search and Rescue. We worked with another ESF 9 partner, the National Park Service, and Colleen was able to pull together a heat map of 2 different data sources, one coming from FEMA, one coming from the state, just to get an understanding of where each are operating. This is not meant to be a tactical dashboard, but so this helps to kind of exercise the concept from last year. And what we're hearing from leadership and from on the ground is that they want to do more of this. So stay tuned. But what we think at a minimum is we do plan to, following this training, hold monthly calls where a core geospatial working group can get together and discuss things like best practices or up-and-coming changes in technology, or like Jared said, the latest version of the template. And we also hope that an agency will come together to set up a daily call during hurricanes, especially because there's so much interagency coordination. And ideally that would have representatives from FEMA, from the National Park Service, the Department of Interior, the US Coast Guard, state and local SAR, and even some of the supporting NGOs, which includes, NAPSG Foundation, IAFC, Humanity Road's been involved, Crowdsource Rescue, and others. And then finally, the emergency management agencies, especially their GIS staff that may not even know you're out there collecting data, but then as soon as they know that, they probably want to be able to utilize it in their own information system. So this group is currently under consideration for affiliation with the National Search and Rescue Committee, and I hope to hear more about that in the coming weeks. We have been doing a bunch of R&D as time allows. I've been working with ESRI or Esri on doing some testing of QuickCapture. So I've taken a GPS layer or a layer that's typically used to catch GPS tracks, and I've tried using the QuickCapture app, and I've tried breaking it and using it in a in a similar way to that SAR team would be using it. And so far I find it really promising. It creates tracks just like a GPS, except for I can send them as soon as I have internet connection and sort of see them with the rest of the data, which saves a lot of time. We're also working with Tracker for ArcGIS and figuring out how that might fit into a search and rescue scenario. Keep an eye out for QuickCapture. It's supposed to be released on the App Store today. I think they even have a search and rescue sample, but it won't be connected to my dashboard you see here. There's more information about how to kind of connect with us and test in our sandbox to follow. We are working to stay in touch with the New Zealand Urban Search and Rescue team, which plays an important role in the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group. They actually adopted this framework a few years ago and have been really leading the way, and we've sort of been watching what they're doing. They do have a different framework for data collection. It's much more, I would say, robust, but we're taking what we can learn from them and incorporate it into best practices here. And I believe we have some Kiwis on the line today, so thanks for attending. They've also made great progress with using drones inside of an information management system. So not just flying drones for video, but actually getting planned intel out of the system, which we think is great. So we're keeping an eye on that. They've made a lot of progress in their country and abroad. We're also trying to actually use GIS, Geospatial Tools, for what it's designed for in large part, which is analysis to gain insight. So regardless of the tool you're using in the field, if we can't use it to our advantage, then we're really missing out on the power of geospatial. And so even as late as last night, we're doing some R&D to see, could we count the number of buildings in an assignment area and the number of buildings we've actually assessed and begin to look at, are we doing effective search coverage in our areas? And we are looking at other technologies that could potentially integrate into an information management system. One that you may have heard about is called the Team Awareness Kit, primarily on Android right now and Windows, called ATAK. And it does allow you to do more command and control type functions, peer-to-peer sharing. And so we're keeping an eye on it and seeing how it works and hoping that they'll adopt the same standard template so that if they are collecting data in the field, it matches the schema that the working group is using. I know we're running late on time, so I just want to talk a little about what's next for you. Number one is keep an eye out for this geospatial working group, hopefully under the banner of NSARC. There are beginning to be training opportunities through Texas A&M outreach through TEAKS. They're starting to incorporate a lot of these workflows into their wide area search training. We'd like to continue the exchange with New Zealand USAR and INSARAG to promulgate best practices. And an event where I think all this will culminate, besides the next major hurricane, is NAPSG hosts a no-cost summit each year called Inspire, and it'll be in Galveston, Texas, November 12th to 14th. And we hope to have a meeting of the minds there. And I know Jared is going to be supporting the State Urban Search and Rescue Conference in Wichita, Kansas in November. It's November 19th to 21st. So those are some opportunities to get engaged coming up. The best place to find out about NAPSG Foundation events is napsgfoundation.org/events. You can click on it right from the homepage banner. And we've actually got more PrepTech talks coming up, not just for search and rescue, but wider GIS for emergency management workflows. And then I think as we switch to Q&A, I know we're just at the end of our official time, so we'll do the Q&A in overtime here. But if you are interested in this community, even if you're not a GIS professional, we are trying to kind of capture interest. We don't have a budget or an official organization other than a working group. But what we'd like to do is find out everybody that's interested and get everybody into one list. So if you're not totally fatigued from the last hands-on exercise, you can scan this code and open up a survey to enter your interest in this group. The link will also be available in the slides, which we'll hand out soon. So with that, I'll just put on our closing slide. And this is our first time using Zoom, so I'm going to attempt to use the Q&A function. And here is our contact information. And if you need the link to that, to register your interest, go ahead there. So before I do Q&A, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time and their attention. I haven't been able to monitor the chat, but it looks like great conversation there. And yeah, I look forward to whatever's next. And I wouldn't mind if there were no hurricanes this season, but hope's not a good strategy. So please take what you learned today and apply it any way you can. And we look forward to hearing your feedback. So thanks a lot. All right, so stand by here while we just go and take a look at some of the open questions.
Paul, do you happen to have the Menti code again? There were several people that were missed that. If you
want,
sure. Could you paste that in the chat, please?
Yep, menti.com, and it was 3871. And maybe you could throw it in the chat.
Yep, I got it.
Cool. So we have 76 votes, and it looks like field data collection gathered the most. So more understanding of how maybe field data collection tools can work, whether it's GPS or Survey 123 or any of the new apps. And then I'm happy to see analysis and reporting so that you know, it's not a black box. It's not just a field app, but you can actually do things with the data. Okay, cool. Jared, and any of the other panelists, were there any specific questions you think we should discuss?
There were several questions about interoperability, just wanting to know if it works with other systems, SAR topo and GPS, or a couple of specific questions.
Yeah, so let me take a look here. And it looks like many questions were answered. I'm assuming you can see the answered column here. Okay, great. And then we have some open questions. So this would be great for smaller communities to get together, sort of a comment. How do we map areas where body searches were conducted by ground teams? So, you know, a good example might be the campfire. Looks like the next person commented on that. So let's just answer that one together. So if you're using SAR topo, which is a really common tool for especially volunteer search and rescue teams, that is technically a web GIS capable system. I have been doing some interoperability testing, and I can get things like KMLs out of it and put those in an ArcGIS map. What I'm having a harder time doing is bringing data into SAR topo. So Matt, if you're on the call, we should talk. You can technically export out of this system into things, but we really want to do live data collaboration, right? We don't want to take stuff out and then have it be static. So yes, technically there's interoperability. It's probably an awareness issue, and that's one of the reasons this working group is formed. How about pictures? Pictures taken and uploaded in the device. I think we put a restriction on the resolution size by default to minimize storage. Jared, do you remember the default configuration we were saying?
They have, I think, if I remember right, they have it broken up into low, medium, and high, and I believe we set it to medium so that you can get good pictures, but it doesn't take a lot of data to upload. Great.
And then there's another question there about downloading maps ahead of time. So with Survey 123 in particular, it requires prep ahead of time. And I know they're looking to make it more what we would call self-service mapping. So you could go in and clip an area. But right now it requires a GIS or an info tech specialist to help you get that prepped. There are other apps that interoperate with Survey 123, like Collector, which you can currently go in and kind of cache an area and work. It just requires a little bit of training. You want to train on the app before you use it.
And in the answer to that question, Paul, I went ahead and pasted the Esri documentation for how to do that. So if anybody really wants to get into the details of it.
Perfect. And I think that a lot of organizations will be using a hybrid system for a while, right? So if you're used to using SAR topo and Avenza for navigation, and you can get up-to-date base maps to do that, you might still use that for navigation, but use Survey for data collection. I think that we weren't necessarily prescribing a technology, but we are prescribing that there are key capabilities you want to make sure your team has before going into any incident.
Do you know about symbology for swiftwater rescue specifically?
I don't. I don't know if Chris Rogers is on the line. Oh, that came from Peter Hanna, so he knows how to get a hold of Chris Rogers. But I'm not sure that there's anything specific to swiftwater rescue, and I'm happy if there is. I'd love to know about it, and maybe we can get our symbology working group to adopt it and make it available. Any other? Yep.
Paula, Jared, it's Lance. Do you have any best practices for clearing your sent box, like at the end of the day or something, once you've ensured your data's been uploaded?
I don't think there's any specific reason why you'd want to do it. If you're using Survey 123 with also what we call the inbox will allow you to see anybody else's data that you have permission to see, which is really handy. The sent box is really a chance to go back and review what you sent. It'd be pretty hard to mess it up, so I don't really see a reason to take it out of the sent box. Do you, Jared?
No, not specifically. If you start getting a lot of data in there, it may be a good idea, but I think that's probably something we may need to investigate a little further with large amounts of data in a survey from one person.
Yeah, I was just curious. I've never really stressed it, so I don't know that, after a couple of days of hundreds of points, would it impact anything?
Yeah, what I do find is more important and often missed is if you were working offline or you just weren't sending your data, it's on your phone. Even if the app crashes or you close your phone, it's there, but no one's going to see it unless you go and send it from the outbox, so to speak. So that's something you want to train on. We do have a training video on that, and it's really important. I think Survey 123 is looking at ways to maybe prompt you. I know QuickCapture has that capability to say, hey, you've got data here. Do you want to send it? But I probably didn't stress enough that we do have training videos that cover some of this stuff. So great. Jared, any other big ones?
Asked about, have you reached out to the Type 1 California Incident Management teams to adopt this platform?
No, but if they're interested in hearing more, we're happy to chat. I think that for a lot of agencies, they are already using this approach for other things. Like FEMA uses a Survey 123 approach for preliminary damage assessment. CAL FIRE uses, I think, Collector and Survey 123 for doing their rapid damage assessment. But I think search and rescue is where we've seen the least amount of adoption, mostly because of awareness, and that's one of the reasons we're having a training like this.
Someone asked what the benefit of utilizing this data collection system over utilizing Avenza. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, sure. So Avenza is a great tool. I use it for hiking. Like if I want a PDF map and I don't want to, I don't want to spend a lot of time prepping it. I actually will use something like SAR Topo and Avenza. But when it comes to data collection, it's all about the resources you have. So think about the scale of a hurricane with 100,000 waypoints and probably, I don't know, over 100 rescue teams. If I have to get shape files or things like manually sent to me and organize it, we're no longer working in real time. And so that's one of the challenges of a system like Avenza. Now, I don't know everything about Avenza. Maybe there's a live data collection system. And as long as it kind of meets those capabilities, then it's a good tool. But the one thing I know is that there's never enough GIS specialists to support lots of manual taking data off of devices and pushing it into a database. I hope that makes sense. And if that person's still on the line, let me know if I didn't answer your question.
There's another one here from Steven. I think offline maps is critical for teams to get their assignments when in the field, so directions to download maps in advance would be very helpful. Yeah, you can still use Survey 123 offline. You don't have the map available unless you did take the steps to download a map offline. But I'd like to note that we've been using apps side by side, so we can use the Survey 123 to collect the data, but then we downloaded a map for offline use in Collector, and then we can use that for our navigation. So that's another way you can kind of do that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jared. And I think it's important to remember that one of the reasons we started with Survey 123 is so that we could actually create a template that people could use with other apps. Survey 123 is really easy to train. And actually I can train it anonymously. So like nobody needed a username today to just get logged in and try it. Or they actually say they didn't need to log in. Collector is a next logical app to try out because it does allow you to do more advanced things. Like I could be drawing assignment maps here and then using Collector to take them offline and still have a navigation capability. And I can actually collect points against my surveys. But again, it all comes down to the resources you have. You need to train up on that process in order to do it. And I know Missouri Task Force 1 and New Zealand Search and Rescue, probably a few others. I'm sure Ohio and New York Task Force 1, they've trained on these methods and they use them already. So I think that's really important. I think probably the closing message, and I don't know how much more time we have for questions, but is if you don't know a GIS person, there's someone that does GIS for their day job. They probably live near you and they probably do a really boring job. And if you were to show them maybe this training video or this website and ask them for help over a coffee or a beer, I really think that's a great way to start the conversation because I find that whenever I expose GIS professionals to these needs, it leads to really fruitful conversation. So I think that's my key takeaway from a lot of the questions we're getting.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us if you guys have specific questions about the template itself. Like I said, I'm the one that's been working on the template for NAPSG. So if you have specific questions or there's something you want to see changed or you find a bug or something, please reach out to us and we'll try to get that fixed.
Yeah, and the link to the template is in a few different places. One of them is in the deployment options here. And it should take you to the latest template. So again, even if you're planning to work with FEMA or IAFC on this, and you want to take a look under the hood, I do have to update the link, is you can check this site and download, and it does imply you have some familiarity with either XLS forms or Survey123, but it's pretty transparent from there, and Jared's done a great job with documentation. So. All right, I think we should probably wrap up. We still have 122 people on, but maybe they just didn't hang up. Should we take one more question? Any other questions you saw, Jared?
Someone asked for a demo of Tracker, but we don't have that currently set up on our system, so we can't do that. Maybe we'll do this one as the last one. Somebody asked why Survey123 over ATAK. Do you want to? You talked to it a little bit earlier. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I think ATAK is something that has been developed inside of the Department of Defense kind of system for command and control. And most of the tools are geared towards that, and they're very good for things like peer-to-peer sharing, facilitating comms, just kind of seeing where everyone else is, which is can be really important to search and rescue. One of the biggest challenges that the search and rescue teams face is sharing their observations from what they're seeing in the field, not just with themselves, but with their organization and others. And so Survey123 is an app that's available today. It's used by many organizations already. It produces web services that can be shared interagency, and it doesn't require a certified TAC developer to support. So we've started to look at Survey123. I actually think there's opportunity for a hybrid down the line where you might use something like TAC or ArcGIS mission awareness plus Survey123 for data collection. But I think it all comes down to, what are your objectives in the field? Are you there? Safety is number one. I think TAC's a great tool for safety, but I also think that Survey123 is something that we've deployed, we've seen deployed, it's supported, and has shown, great success in the field. I hope that helps, and I apologize we can't talk. It's just the way this was set up.
Hey, Paul, it's Lance.
Hey, Lance, how's it going? Yep.
Yeah, that was well said. And so we continue to pilot TAK. It was designed for Blue Force tracking. It does that really well. We've put our symbology into it. The challenge is really it's what you see is what you get. So that data needs to be exported so you could actually do something with it, not just see a bunch of icons. So we can continue to work with it. The Guard is using it, and so our force multipliers for the big one are interested, and you know, FEMA's interested in being able to make that possibly another tool in the toolkit.
Thanks a lot, Lance. Yeah, I appreciate your insight. And we admittedly, you know, Jared and I are just getting logged into TAK Sandbox to figure out how it works, and really importantly, how it could interoperate with other systems, because that's just critical. So. All right. I think there's actually a lot of really good questions, and I have not used Zoom before, so I want to make sure we don't miss any of them. Maybe what we will do is we will do the best we can to review all these, answer them, and put them in a doc. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, we can do that. I saved the webinar chat so we can look through that, and then we'll try to see if we can save the question and answers here.
All right, cool. That sounds good. Well, I think what I'll do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll mute, and then we'll make sure we capture all this stuff out of Zoom before we close it, including the recording. So I'm going to stop recording now. Thanks everyone for attending and listening this long if you have, and I'll stop the recording.